Hi everyone, welcome to another comics loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted on this episode to be talking with someone who knows the world of comics well, someone who has explored the history of comics, and someone who has some really nice visual framing on your video as well. There's like books on one side, books on the other. So I can tell you pay attention to the visual, which is always nice.
I
Um,
do.
yeah, and that is author Ken Quattro. May I call you Ken? Is that okay?
Certainly. That's my
All right,
name.
all right. Well, Ken, thanks for joining for a talk, and I'll mention a particular work of yours, which is Invisible Men, Trailblazing Black Artists of Comic Books. So much appreciation there for the work that you've done in documenting some of the movements in comics as well.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Spent a lot of time on that book, over 20 years. So
yeah.
a lot of research went into it.
Yes, I imagine so. I imagine so. Lots of comics reading and
Well,
other
lot of digging
ways.
through archives. That's kind of what I do is I do a lot of archival research. My whole thing is basically using primary sources when I write about histories.
Hmm.
Instead of my personal opinion is that comics history has been ill served by a lot of it being written based upon anecdotal evidence or apocryphal stories and things like that. And
Hmm.
what I do is go beyond that. Is I go back to primary sources, newspaper articles, magazine articles, interviews, whatever I can find um, to sort of supplement, the histories that I write. And I've been doing that for over 50 years. So
Yeah, yeah.
I've been investing in it a long time.
What connected you with comics and the world of comics?
Oh, geez. Okay. Well, I started reading comics in 1961, which is probably what your grandfather would tell you. But
Mhm, mhm.
uh, my first comic book actually is the Flash number 121. That's how specific I am because I can remember seeing it on the rack, on the spinner rack at the time.
Nice.
And I'd only been exposed to classic comic books my older brother had. And I saw this character running along a telephone wire and he's being pursued by another guy in a red suit with a lightning bolt in his chest. And I go, what is this? I was just a little kid and it was unlike anything else I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And I was immediately hooked. And that was it. I mean, just ever since in comic books, it literally changed my life. I mean, the whole direction of my life, everything I ever wanted to do. I wanted to be a comic book artist. So I studied art for 20 years and, throughout school and college and everything like that. But back when I wanted to get in the comic art in the 70s and that, it was comic books were in kind of a rough shape at the time
Hmm.
and it wasn't paying much. And so, I had to go in other directions and that, but I've loved comics my entire life. And I became interested in the history of the medium outside of just what appears on the page.
Hmm.
And, that drove me to investigate the people who create the comic books, the artists, the writers, the publishers, and everything surrounding it. Because I've come to discover that comic books have a special place in American culture in particular, in world culture
Hmm.
certainly, but my specialty is American comic books. And like I said, I've spent over 50 years now, digging into it and trying to find the place that comic books and comics in general serve in American culture. And
Yeah.
it's much greater than people realize. We have a very myopic view of comic books. We're
Hmm.
very insular in the sense that once you're a comic book fan, you only see comic books and the people who create them and stuff like that. But comic books in general have had a direct impact on American culture,
Hmm.
not just nowadays where they're more popular, but even back in the day, going back to the 1930s and 40s, there was a lot of oh people involved in comics in organizations involved in comics and a lot of outside forces involved in comics that most comic book fans don't realize. And my whole thing is to sort of like present this macro view of a comics history instead of the microscopic view that most comic fans have.
Hmm.
I like to take a wider view of comics history, and that's kind of what led me to write Invisible Men. Is it's a long story involved in it, but I became interested in this artist named Matt Baker
Hmm. Hmm.
20 some years ago. And Matt Baker is one of the great comic book artists of all time, but specifically of the 1940s, of the golden age of comics. And very few people knew much about Matt Baker back at the time, 20 some years ago, other than the fact that he was a Black artist.
Hmm.
And one of the apocryphal stories was that he was the only Black artist working in comic books at that time, which just logically didn't seem right. I mean, out of the millions of Black people in the United States, only one worked in the comic book industry, an
Hmm.
industry that employed thousands of people. So I began looking into Matt Baker, and I began contacting all my different sources and looking around, and I couldn't find anything more until finally somebody directed me towards a man named Samuel Joyner, who was a retired Black cartoonist in Philadelphia. And he had known Matt Baker. He was a
Hmm.
much older man. He was retired himself. He was in his 80s at the time. And I contacted Mr. Joyner. And this is all pre-internet, you have to understand. Or the internet was just beginning. So a lot of this was done through correspondence in the old, literally, I would type out a letter to somebody and asking information.
Hmm.
And majority of the time when you contact somebody in a cold call like that, you get nothing back.
Hmm.
Well, Mr. Joyner not only answered me with a 4-page detailed letter, but he sent me all these news clippings and stuff. And Jason, I was stunned. I mean, this man just opened my eyes to the fact, like, not only was there Matt Baker, a Black artist working in comic books, but there's other Black artists who'd worked in comic books.
Hmm.
And that just started me on this whole uh, journey to try to see who else was involved. But the problem is that most of the sources I normally used, which are libraries and institutions like that, museums, didn't have anything at all about any of these Black artists.
Hmm.
So I started thinking about it, and I had to redirect my thinking. So I started looking into Black media, and I started reading Black newspapers from that time and Black magazines and interviews with people. And the problem is that there was no one source to
Hmm.
go to. I mean, wasn't like there was one library that had all these Black newspapers. Unfortunately, the thinking back in the day is that Black newspapers were disposable, so no libraries kept them. They would keep the New York Times or the LA Times, but they would not keep any Black newspapers. So I had to do all this piecemeal. And that's why it took me 20 years. I had to just, wherever I could find information, and
Wow.
piece together all these stories. And I also did genealogical research too at the same time, which is something I do with a lot of the people I write about, because I want to understand where they came from
Hmm.
and what their place is in the world. Again, we have a very myopic view of comic book artists and writers and thinking about all they do is comic books.
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
every person is much more than their job. And that's what I try to express in my writing. And that's what I've done over the years, but specifically with these Black artists I did in this book. And I focused upon 18 of the artists, the most prominent Black artists I could find. And that's what, when the book came out, the book has really transcended comics history because I've gotten more feedback from people who've never read anything about comic books than people within the comic book industry. I mean, I've been contacted by the head librarian at the Library of Congress who bought the book, and she interviewed me. She had me on a broadcast with her and stuff like that because it revealed so much information that culturally had never been studied before, of parts of Black history and American history. And again, that's what I try to do with my writing, is just show where the place of comic books within the realm of the wider scope of history.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's it's an amazing work and an amazing kind of act of care. And as you were talking about the days before the internet, I was just thinking back to that art of writing a letter, and then you're absolutely right. You might get something back, you might not, and you would not be getting it back immediately if you did get
Oh no,
anything
it
back.
would be months. It would be months a lot of times. I mean, I corresponded with everybody from like Will Eisner, Alex Toth, and Joe Kubert, and I can't even think of how many different artists. A lot of times you could back two or three sentences,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
some people would spend the time. Joe Kubert spent the time to write me a nice letter in some detailed information, but that's how it was back in the day,
Yeah, yeah.
to do it. And it was kind of nice. I mean, one, you have the tangible copy to hold in your hand, say like, wow, this is, written by Will Eisner, and he spent the time to sit down and write me a letter,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
But that's one of the things that we're losing nowadays is the tangible history. And that's one of the things I kind of worry about as a comics historian, is a lot of the stuff we do now is all digital and virtual.
Hmm.
And I worry about going forward in the future when people come to study our time, what will exist, what will be there for them to see.
Yeah, yeah. And do I spot an Eisner over your shoulder there? Is that
Yeah, I won
yeah,
the Eisner Award for
yeah,
best comics related book in 2021.
yeah, yeah. No small feat there either.
It was nice to get it. I was shocked that I got it, but it was nice.
Yeah. Um,
Unfortunately, it was during COVID and I didn't get to go and receive
uh,
it in person, but it was a
yeah,
nice thing.
yeah, yeah. Any particular questions that you're currently drawn to and exploring in comics, or any particular artists that you're currently exploring as well?
Yeah, I'm constantly exploring stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like a shark. I never stop. Um, I have any number of projects I'm working on. One book that's almost done, which I can't say too much about it because there's certain things I'm sworn to secrecy because I have contracts and that. But
Hmm.
supposedly it's to be made into a movie, uh,
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
afterwards and stuff like that. But as time allows, I'll tell people more about it. And then there's just generally, I collaborate a lot with other historians. I write chapters for books and help with background and a lot of sources, a lot of things you read on Wikipedia.
Hmm.
If you do a search, we'll see it came from me originally in that. And, it's just something I've always done. I've sort of like always hung in the background, and I'd help out on TV shows and movies and things like that. They'll contact me for background information, historical information.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, so it keeps me busy, even in old age here.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Any particular kind of interaction that you've had around a movie or a TV show or anything like that that
Well, there was a movie a few years back called Professor Marston and the Wonder Women.
yes, uh-huh, uh-huh.
Okay, I was a historical consultant on that, and it even led to a sort of a conflict with the director, who's her name Ava DuVernay, I believe, was the
Hmm. Hmm.
director of it. And the history, the actual history of William Moulton Marston and the people involved is quite a bit different than what is portrayed on the screen there.
Uh-huh.
And I had a long discussions with her, several of her production assistants who wanted me to read over the script and correct historical inaccuracies, of which there's many.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't allow me to do that. She prevented me from doing it, but they still credited me in the film because they did use a lot of my background information and everything. But that's kind of the thing you have to deal with when you deal with Hollywood. I was on a TV show last year. It's called American Experience. It's on PBS.
Hmm.
And they interviewed me for 2.5 hours and ended up putting me on screen for about 5 minutes. I mean, so there's a lot of cutting that gets done when you do this kind of stuff. But like I say, I've done background for so many like newscasts and TV shows where it'll just be a quick like, hey, can you tell us about so and so? And I'll write a quick paragraph or two. That's
Hmm.
most of the time what it is.
Yeah, yeah. I'm friends with a good number of people that teach history, and that's one of the things that I talk with them about is looking at filmed versions and then looking at primary sources to try to figure out, okay, what's the accuracy, what's the inaccuracy here? Where did they get it right, and where does it sort of go off the rails?
Yeah, it's kind of maddening from my point of view, but it's just the way of the world. They try to make stories where stories don't exist, or they'll create facts
Hmm.
to just make it more interesting. And I don't know. I'm a purist. I like to see just facts. In this book I'm working on now is so fact filled, and the person involved in it, who's at the center of it, is so interesting. I believe the history alone is enough, but we'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah,
What will come of it.
yeah, and looking forward to it. Um, I think, let's see. By means of a final question. We've talked about questions you're exploring,
Mhm.
um, any particular comics and research that you're currently reading and involved in that you can
Oh
talk about.
God. Uh, like I said,
Always
Jason,
reading, isn't
it's like I said, I'm constantly reading. As you can sort of see back here, you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg behind me here. But
it? Hmm.
most of my time is spent reading primary sources. I don't really keep up with modern comics that much because one, I don't have really the interest in a lot of the more modern comics.
Hmm.
I had a discussion with, I was in a discussion one time with, Scott McCloud.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the way because the question was, is how do we foresee comic books going forward? And I predicted, now this is back about 20 years ago, of more of a boutique kind of comic book, meaning that they would be smaller in scope and smaller in the amount of people they appeal to, and they'd be more specific. They would only maybe appeal to 100 or so, or a couple thousand people, instead of these mass produced comic books that we're used to. I mean, the comic books that sell nowadays, even the best selling ones, sell a fraction of what comics used to in the past.
Hmm.
And considering that per capita, we have a much greater um, potential audience out there. Comic books really, at least the print comic books, is basically going away and will go away probably within your lifetime. I don't know about mine, but they'll disappear except for a niche,
Hmm.
thing. And who knows, maybe AI might start creating comic books, and then there'll be no need for artists and writers, which terrifies me thinking about that. But I mean, you can see it in Hollywood, you can see it in fine art, in writing. I mean, if they're being displaced, there's no reason to believe that comic book artists and writers won't be displaced. And like I
Hmm.
said, I spent over 20 years, as an artist, studying art, and it kills me to think about that the human element will be gone.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the way I look at modern comics. So I do what I can in trying to record the history of the medium, uh, to leave it for future historians, and hopefully anybody who wants to pursue it, because comics and comic art and that should be considered along with every other aspect of American culture and American history.
Hmm.
And I this past summer I appeared at a convention in Chicago, and I had several people come up to me who are history teachers. And what one guy even came up to me, and was so neat. He had all these post-it notes in his copy of my book. And he was telling me how he teaches a whole section of his history class, an American history class, based on my book,
Oh,
The
nice.
Black Art, in which that gives me a little warm and fuzzy feeling, knowing that the comics have risen to that level,
Hmm.
that people are taking them, seriously like that. And like I say, that's my contribution there, and that's what I do. As far as modern comics, I really am not connected to it, which I'm most sorry to say, but it's just the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, by means of, I think the final official question, spaces where people can go to find out more about your work and any resources that you would want to share for
Oh
listeners.
gosh. I mean, you go online and Google my name, you'll find me all over the place because
Hmm.
I've been on so many different sites, but I have my own blog, which I haven't contributed to in a while. It's called Comics Detective,
Hmm.
COMICS Detective, all one word, .com. I was given the nickname of the comics detective a long time ago, and it's just something I use, for stuff like that. But that contains a few of my articles. Every once in a while I'll write for Alter Ego magazine, which is Roy Thomas's comics history magazine, which I fully uh, support and hope people will check it out, just for other people, not just for myself. But um, like I said, you Google my name, you're going to find me all over the place. There's so many different books, and all these books behind me are just some of the books I've contributed to. And
Awesome.
it's
Awesome.
I'm easy to find if somebody really wants to read it.
Well, Ken, I appreciate the work that you do in preserving history and bringing stories to light that otherwise would have been lost, I'm sure, a long time ago. And appreciate what you're doing in education and that teachers are bringing your work into the classrooms as well.
Yeah, like I say, to me that's the greatest thing. I mean, because I came from a time where comic books were ridiculed,
Hmm.
and they
Hmm.
were, if you told people you were an adult reading a comic book, they thought you were a moron.
Right.
To the level of respect that they have now, and it's such an important part of American culture that people are just more receptive to comics, and it's a great time for comics in general. I just don't see going forward what's going to happen. I mean, like I say, the whole AI thing just scares the crap out of me.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Well, I appreciate your time. Glad to have you
sure.
back anytime, and hopefully AI will stay at bay and people will still be enjoying.
I
Uh,
hope so, Jason.
yeah,
It's you
same.
young
I
guys like
hope so
that have
as
got to
well.
keep it alive, keep it going.
That's right. That's right.
That's right.
The human condition deserves the human voice.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Perfectly said. I love
We'll
that.
put that at the bottom.
There you
Um,
go. Okay.
all
Well,
right.
thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much. Glad to talk anytime.
Sure.
All right.
Take it easy.
Take care.
Yep.